Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Okay, well, welcome back to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism. It's Mick and I again speaking about Stoicism and applying it in daily life. We were just going to jump in today just because it's a big topic, but a good topic. So, Mick, you reached out to me to say that you wanted to talk about Musonius Rufus and his teachings and his lectures and his sort of rules for life. I can't remember if he called them rules or lessons for life, but we were going to talk about Musonius today, and I think it's a very good topic because when we talk about the usual Stoic writings, there are usually three big ones, right? Which is writings of Marcus and Seneca and Epictetus. But Musonius Rufus is sort of he's a progenitor to Epictetus because he was Epictetus' teacher, right? So tell me a little bit about what you know and why you brought that up today.
And on that last point, Ed, I mean, that's a really important part of philosophy, right? So Socrates was the student of Plato, Plato the student of Aristotle, Alexander the Great the student of Aristotle. So it's important to point that out, that he was actually the teacher of Epictetus. But for me, he's always been a fascination because he takes the philosophy of Stoicism, which is a very practical philosophy, if you ask me, hence why we have the title includes applied Stoicism. But what I just call the rules of Rufus growing up is it's very practical, right? He, of course, says, what's important in life is not material wealth or the car you drive or the house you live in, but the virtues you live by. Essentially, every Stoic says that. But he also says it really doesn't matter how much, you talk about it so much, so Adam and Mick, if you're just talking on podcasts about it, but then you turn around and walk off and don't practice them, what's the point, right? So there's a practical application that I think every Stoic certainly wants to adhere to, aspires to. But then he gets really practical on things at the time. I mean, he was born, I think, around 20 AD or whatever we're calling that now. And died around 100 AD, so he's 80. That gives you an indication that a lot of his rules to live by may have been way ahead of his time. If somebody lived 80 years, right, if I'm doing my marine math correctly, that's pretty impressive back, 2,000, almost 2,000 years ago. A lot of the things he advocated all now have titles, right? So intermediate fasting, minimalism, ice baths, if you will. I don't know if that's a title of something, but he did advocate for all the. I'm sure you do that up in Canada. To be frank, I saw one of my Canadian friends send me a meme, not to get sidetracked, of the birth of a Canadian, and he's busting out of a frozen lake, and he's already in hockey gear, right? But my point being is, like, he advocated for simple living, having just what you need, which, in modern talk would be minimalism, which I think is a great concept. Simpleness in food, certainly no gluttony. That's part of self-discipline. Physically, what we would call functional fitness in the military. He really pushed for you to push yourself physically, whether it's running up a mountain or swinging an axe, to chop wood. He said he actually highlighted that it should be practical. So not about, going to the gym and look at yourself in the mirror, because all you do is, do curls or whatever. He says you should push yourself physically to be prepared for hardship, but essentially it should be functional. So there's a big movement now not to just sit in the gym and do endless amounts of repetitions to get larger, but to be like a CrossFit type thing. And I'm not pushing CrossFit, but um, because it's functional, right? Jumping, climbing a rope, um, swinging a hammer. These are all things that or actual combat sports, right? Those are very practical, and not to push boxing every time I sit on the Stoic podcast, but these are very practical applications of physical fitness. He pushed this again a couple almost 2,000 years ago, and now it's almost like people are just realizing how helpful they are. So, to start with, I think it's important to point out that he almost lays out, rules for society, even. Like if Stoicism was gonna be truly the cosmopolitan, universal citizen concept that Zeno and many others aspired to, then I would say the rules for Rufus add a great deal to how that could be. I mean, even went into hygiene. Like you have a responsibility to be groomed and hygienic, just because you're part of society, and that's just the way it is, right? So, anyway, I'll stop there. I'd like to hear what you think about Gaius Musonius Rufus, the Roman Socrates. I think is what his nickname was, or is now for us
Yeah.
Stoics.
Yeah, I've heard that name attributed to him as well. So I mean, there's the simple part of it, I think, which is like we talk about how great Epictetus is, but he's ultimately Epictetus does not become who he is without this person, right?
Right.
Obviously as a teacher. But I think the interesting thing about it as well is and I know I go on about this. This is just something that kind of bugs me a lot of the time is this idea of Broics or Stoicism with a capital M at the end for male or Stoicism with a dollar sign. Is that Musonius is so he's far enough ahead of his time in like a 2,000 years ahead of his time type of thing because you know it's easy to highlight that his writings speak about things like social activism and feminism and
Yes.
vegetarianism and minimalism, but also, like he some of his teachings speak about things like um, uh, earn a living by living according to nature. And of course, when you start to read into his writings, the comments like from Marcus about what's good for the hive is good for the bee, and therefore doing something for the social good as opposed to just for yourself. I mean, that's something that he definitely is talking about, and we talk about this sort of concept that some of the old philosophy stuff is just old white men and it's all about being on your own and being tough, and it's really like, well, I guess no, because ultimately there's too much there to say that Musonius would have believed that men were better than women, and he would be okay with slavery or he would be okay with whichever. In reality, he had what I would consider for the time period very forward thoughts, and when people
Oh
are
yeah.
out there looking for um, when people are out there looking for a philosophy or something like that. It has happened to me in conversation. They'll be like, "Well, I'm looking for something like I believe in social justice issues, and I'm pro women's rights and pro choice or whichever." And then you go, "Well, that's Stoicism." They're like, "Really?" And you're like, "Yeah," and they think that it's tech billionaires taking, no offense, but taking ice baths and earning $1 billion, right? And you're like, that's not really.
That's
Most of the
cherry
Stoic
picking. That's
that's
cherry picking.
very cherry picking,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that sticks out to me the most with regards to Rufus, because it's a thing where as always, people can skew this depending on what they read, but ultimately, when you go back to the core text, I think that's what jumps out to me. Very very modern thinking, right? I
Yes.
mean, I think you can get gaslit by people sometimes where they'll say, well, did he own slaves or not? I honestly don't know the answer to that question, but I can certainly tell from his writings and the way that he talks about how to live. I can't see him treating his slaves poorly.
There's nothing
And
I've ever read that said he owned slaves. I
right,
think
but
that would
also
be in there, right? He was more of a
right.
advisor kind of a middle class guy, if I
Yeah.
recall correctly.
Yeah. His father was an aristocrat. He had aristocratic
But it was
startings.
like
I'm not,
sub aristocrat or something. It was
yeah, so his
yeah.
father was, and I'm quoting from a book we're going to cite in a moment, but his father had a rank of equus, which is just below a Roman senator. But it would have been one of those things that he was probably he was probably on the upper end of the middle. But I think and some people would say, oh well, obviously it's some sort of nepotism or whatever, and I would not disagree that that's possible, but at the same time, it seems like he was making a choice to kind of go against what I think a lot of his compatriots at that sort of level in society would have
Oh
said.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's what
I
I
mean, like you
find it.
said, there's 2 lectures in the book you're citing, Adam, that
Yeah,
just talk about the equality of men and women.
yes.
Which I
So
mean, Google it. There's that doesn't even exist in many, maybe even a majority of countries today. For him to be talking about that at the time of Roman emperors,
yeah,
um, where women were not expected to be anywhere near equal, was
yeah,
revolutionary. So that's an
yeah,
important point that you can't just point out the ice baths in the you know CrossFit or whatever you want to, or
yeah,
intermittent
yeah,
fasting, and then not point out that Stoicism that is part of it, but Stoicism is also egalitarian. It is equal rights,
yes,
not just for men and women, but for everybody.
yeah,
Race and ethnic group and all that.
right,
And I would assume sexual orientation.
yeah.
We could have a whole discussion on that, but
I
sexual
mean,
orientation changed a lot from when Stoicism started to where
yeah,
we are today.
yeah,
And I would say in a regressive way,
yeah.
at least acceptance of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at and I will speak to that. My family has a huge part of my family is LGBTQ, and I think it's interesting to think because people kind of look back at this and so many people I hear use the things like traditional values, and in reality, when you go back to Musonius' time, there wasn't really a sexual orientation discussion. It was sort of a I've always sort of, when I describe my own political ideas, I sometimes describe myself as Roman, which is like, don't hurt anyone, pay your taxes and vote, right? Like, don't break the law, don't hurt anyone, pay your taxes and vote, and that's sort of how the Romans viewed it. And so it didn't matter if you who your relationships were with, right? It was very common for even high-ranking, well, even emperors, right, to
Mm-hmm.
never marry and to proceed their line through adoption and to have homosexual partners, right? And so and it's funny because Musonius doesn't really talk about that. He talks about a gender, right, in terms of men and women are equal, but he doesn't talk about, I think, sexual orientation because probably to him it would have been whatever, right?
That's
Because that's
probably
kind
the
of how that
case,
was, right? Yeah,
right? Like he talked about the
yeah,
female male inequality because
yeah,
it probably was an issue. I think we can safely say it was an issue,
yeah,
but he didn't feel a need to talk about the acceptance of people who aren't in a heterosexual relationship, probably because it wasn't an issue.
right,
Happy to hear if somebody correct us on that.
sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I think at the same time, there's so much of this philosophy which is literally like you control yourself, you control what you do, you need to treat others well, right? So yeah, he doesn't say you need to be nice to persons of different sexual orientations than you are, but when he's talking about treating everyone well, it would be cherry picking to say that he's talking about straight white men being treated well. He's talking about
Right.
everyone, and you really do get that from what he's talking about, which we look at that as a modern thing in the sense of like the creation of civil rights, the creation of constitutions. And like Canada has a constitution, the US has a constitution, there's civil rights present in both of those. But in fact, the Roman period that Musonius was living in had a constitution, had rights, and had in some ways more freedoms, but also less freedoms depending on how you're looking at it. And I
Oh,
think that's what I see is his the modernism to him that we would see today. And then there's this big gap in time of sort of the dark ages where it's repression and and really nasty stuff going on in the world. So that's what I see
right.
when I look at him. And I think it's important for us to speak about him because I think if the first three I mentioned, Epictetus, Marcus, and Seneca, are pillars, Musonius rapidly becomes a fourth pillar. You know what I mean? Like that, he's
Yeah.
one of those ones that's not talked about enough, I think. But also, if someone's read the first big three, looking for another one, you kind of go, well,
Oh yeah.
he's an easy step because it's like when we read Marcus or we read this Epictetus, and then you learn that the Stoics viewed Socrates as a progenitor. You go back and you say, I should read Socrates, right? Which, not that you can read him, but read things written
Yeah.
about
Read
him, right?
about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
and
the
I think
Godfather
that's
of Stoicism is the way it was always taught to me.
absolutely, and that's what I was always taught, right? And so I think that's really important is to think about it this way. So, but the other thing I will say, because sorry, I'm talking a lot on this, but the other thing I would say is the thing I like about Musonius is he is a lot more complete. We have the meditations from Marcus, and we have the handbook and the discourses from Epictetus, and we have Seneca's letters. Musonius is also very complete. There's a bunch of stuff from um, we know that gets cited by different writers that is now in fragments or lost to time by us. So when you look at Musonius, it is quite a complete set of. I'm not sure that I could say it's complete. I don't know enough about that, but it seems very complete in the sense of his lectures are complete. They're not fragments. We're not trying to piece it together from, and then sort of draw conclusions from it. And so that's the thing I think that I like to lean on for people as well is it's a complete text in the sense of you can read it and it's all there. Sometimes you read Marcus and he makes reference. Well, there's a part we know that Marcus makes reference, for example, to plays written by I can't remember who it was that don't exist anymore, and so we get the reference in the sense of we know what he's trying to reference, but I don't know what that play said, and I'll never know.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and that's sort of a challenge.
I think
So,
most of what we know about Rufus, just a shorthand him here, is lectures, notes from his lectures from his students.
mhm.
Like I think it's Lucius's. If I'm reaching pretty deep back. I know we have the book, and I have been reading this again. So, um, and
Yeah,
you've
we
met him,
should.
right? Yeah,
Yes,
we should
Chuck and
actually.
I know each
Yeah.
other pretty
He
well,
didn't ask us
actually.
to plug his book, but we're going to do it
No,
anyway. Yeah.
yeah.
This
So,
is Stoic Lessons, Musonius
yes,
Rufus, complete work by Dr. Chuck Tra-
Chakrapani.
Chakrapani.
Yeah.
Chakrapani, right?
Yep.
That it?
Exactly.
Very good.
Yeah,
Highly recommended. And he's
I
a,
do highly recommend
yeah.
it. It's an interesting book as well because he breaks it down well, and this is where I know we should talk about this quickly, and then we'll get really deep into Rufus's. He breaks it down well. So what he doesn't do, it's what it is not is a direct copy of the lectures. What it is
Right.
it's like a read along. I can't remember how to say this, and if you have a better word for this, is great. But it gives you, like, for example, for lecture one clear proof is better than many repetitive ones. The key ideas in the lecture are summarized in 3 points, and then there's context given and some good talking points. Now he's citing the work, he's citing the source material, so he's not just coming up with this on his own. But it's an interest. I found this to be very helpful when reading it, just because it's like a I'm trying to think of what to call it. It's like a lesson book that goes alongside the lectures. Now, it's important when we talk about this, though, that these aren't the lectures 100%. So
Right.
I'd love to get a quick a view from you on something. I prompted you on this before we were talking, which was I get a lot of questions from people where they're like, do I go to the originals or do I read new people like Donald Robertson and Chuck Chakrapanny and Ryan Holiday, for example? What's your view on that?
So, what I've seen growing up with philosophy is when you tell people just go read like Meditations, because that's the book everybody's, or the work, I should say, that everybody's familiar with. So, that's not necessarily a great piece of advice. And why I say that, if they get the wrong one and it's hard to read and they don't really understand that he didn't write it with the intent for it to be a book, he wrote it as, basically journaling to himself. Um, at least I've had some feedback where it's like, I didn't really understand what you're saying, so I stopped reading it. So I think the whole point is to actually learn the philosophy and see if it's, for you. So I highly recommend starting with books that put it into modern understanding. And then when you understand the concepts that they're trying to get out, and it's easier, quite frankly, than Old English or whatever. I mean, I have a copy downstairs. It was 1880 of Meditations. Like, I can't read it because it'd fall apart. But if I did, I probably would be like, I don't really understand what this guy's trying to say, because it's just written in a different, which is totally different than when he wrote it in, right? So my point being is, I think it's more important to understand first by reading, like Ryan, who's a friend of mine, and Donald, who are friends of both of ours, but then I'd also go back and start really diving deep into the original once you get the broad concept, right? That's my recommendation. That's what I recommend to most people is read it to the point where you understand, and my dad used to speak ancient Greek, Latin. And he would tell me, if you go and if you actually know the original language well enough, which most people don't, it's worth reading it in that, because so much is lost in translation. I mean, it's a cliche for a reason. But unless you plan on really like completely dedicating and learning, original texts and all these things like that, I think it's better to learn in a modern way, and then to dive deeper into the original text once you understand when somebody is really giving you that concept.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. I mean, we know for a fact with meditations that everyone has one they like, a version of it, and it's not that they're all fundamentally different. It's that they are all written with different intentions in mind. So Robin Waterfield wrote a meditations recently that was much. It was probably much more correct to the meaning of the words of it, but it wasn't, for example, like the version of meditations that Ryan Holiday talks about, which I think it's George Strong. I can't remember who it is, but that one is written more to be read. So it's much more lyrical in the sense of the sentences flow nicely and it's written nicely and you can read it like a book more. And
Mm-hmm.
so in that circumstance, I would say,
And which
you
one
have
was
to
that?
find. I don't remember who was the author of the Ryan Holiday one, but if you're on Ryan Holiday, sorry, we'll tout for everybody today. If you're on Ryan Holiday's Painted Porch, a bookstore website, the
Yeah.
meditations that he carries is the one that I believe is his favorite, and that one is written more to be more. I call it lyrical in the sense of it really reads well. It's not got all these, I guess, fancy or old time terms. It's very modernized, and it's very easy to read. It's like that with a lot of those translations, and so I do think working with the modern authors is a good thing because, as you've said, the language just matches with what we're trying to interpret in our own heads. When your father spoke Greek, I'm sure he knew it as a language that you could he would read it like we read English. Do you know what I mean? Where he could
Mm-hmm.
read it maybe on the page. I didn't, of course, I did not know your father, but that's the way I think it is when someone can speak that language. But since we can't speak that language and someone's interpreting it for you, you're trying to do the math in your head basically of how this all fits together. And I don't know that that is an easy thing for people to do. And I think many people look at these philosophy schools that are older and they struggle with those initial, what we call, some people call them infection vectors. That's a kind of a gross term, but people struggle with that first step into it, and then it turns them off. And so, yes, I do generally say, Donald, who is a friend of both of ours, Ryan, who fairly well, Chuck, Massimo Pigliucci,
I
and
don't know, Chuck.
Sellers, and all of those, like ones that we've all dealt with.
No
Those are
sellers. Yeah.
modern people interpreting them for others, and I think
And they're
that's
doing
good.
I think, a great service.
I think so.
You know.
Yeah, I think so. But also, I think just on one point about Stoicism, I think we are meant to be a philosophy that is spoken about. We the name of the podcast being Pub and Porch is because it's about the in the street, in the pub conversation that you have, and these authors like Donald and Ryan, it feels very conversational with them, and that's intentional because
Mm-hmm.
we intend to talk about this and have discourse on it. And I think that's why I tell people to try that out. I've had a lot of people who actually the first thing they saw was Verissimus, the graphic novel Donald Robertson did, and
Yeah.
people would think, well, that's a
Which is
comic
a
book.
nickname for Aurelius.
Right, exactly.
To let everybody
And
know that doesn't.
right, and it's a comic book essentially. It's a graphic novel, but I have a lot of people that read that and were like, "Holy cow, this is great. Where can I find more?" And then you hear they read the first meditations for the first time and you go, "Oh,
Right.
okay. You're fine now. Be free," right?
Yeah,
So,
and that's the genesis of the philosophy, right? So if you go,
yeah.
and I'm an advisor for Plato's Academy Center,
Yeah.
which is awesome, and they know where it was. It's a dog park right now, so they're going to excavate and set it up for the grandeur it should be. But most philosophies are in the ivy towers, right? Whereas Stoicism, it's a stoa, it's a porch, hence part of our name. They just met on the porch, and lots of times they just walk around Athens. There's mountains that ring Athens. I lived there for 3 years,
Yeah.
and just talk philosophy. It was talked in the streets, right? It's really how Socrates did it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the pub, as you already mentioned, Adam. Not only is it like the common man's place to hang out and talk philosophy, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, but there's a pub. My favorite pub outside of Ireland is literally the James Joyce, which is right under the Acropolis. And they found the Stoa, and they had to actually remove a tavern. And it's literally steps from the door of the James Joyce.
Right.
So two of my favorite things right there: pubs and Stoicism, Irish pubs and Stoicism. So that's kind of the part of the genesis of our name.
Right.
So if you ever take your pilgrimage to, which you should, because it's already being excavated. You could already see the porch. If you could already see the things that were around it,
Yeah.
and I'm sure they're going to do a great job. And it's hopefully they'll have a museum, associated with it. But you can have a pint at the James Joyce Distillery right there, which is also one of the greatest writers in history. But,
Well, that sounds so. Funny thing for listeners of the podcast, Mick and I have never met each other in person, oddly enough. So who knows? Maybe the first time we meet will be at the Joyce in Athens. My partner and I are both deep into classical history and archaeology. She actually has done archaeological digs in the classical world.
oh, really?
Modern now, she didn't travel back in time.
Yeah, she should
Yeah,
volunteer for that. That would be really
yeah. So
cool.
it's
Maybe
one of
she
those
can get us
things
an
where
artifact.
we're going back to Athens. Let's call it that. So it'll be
Yeah.
fun. So getting back
Yes.
to Rufus, though, I think um, there's two key parts, and Chuck's book talks about this, right? And I'm really glad we cited that because that was a big preparatory work for me for today, and I think for you as well. So in Chuck's book, there's basically two portions of it, right? There's the there's the teachings essentially, which are the essential things that he has sort of always repeated or talked about throughout his philosophy. And then there's the actual lectures, which is there are 21 lectures shown in Chuck's book, everything from men and women are equal down to what type of hairstyling is best, which which I got to be honest, I'm not there yet. I haven't read that one yet, but so there's those two parts of it. But I think that's where I do like Chuck's book is that he you can take the essential teachings out and learn those, and there's about 12. There's 12 of those, right, listed by Chuck, and then there's another 21 lectures on top of that to read. And the lectures I do think are good as well. But maybe we should focus on the teachings first because the lectures are even in their own world. They're their own kind of not we're debating, but it's their own discussion topic, I would say. But in terms of the teachings of Rufus and how we could use those things today, I think that's really important. So let's take a look at it's chapter 2 in Chuck's books, but it's the essential teachings, which is the 12 that Musonius Rufus had. So I guess first and foremost, we'll start with number 1. In arguments, clarity is essential. We don't need arguments to prove the same point. We need clarity of the proof. We need to be clear about what we're discussing. Proof should be derived from what we know to establish what we don't know, and likewise, we don't need any precepts to guide us. Essential ones will do. So if we look at that, for example, I think when I look at that, and I work in the engineering world, I get into a lot of debates with engineers about how stuff's supposed to work or not work, and what's wrong and what's right. And I think it's important to say that Musonius here is trying to say, and especially in the day that in the day-to-day world we have today, where there's a lot of things like misinformation and stuff like that going around.
A
This is
lot.
in some ways, this is a key rule, because it's like stop worrying about how to argue things. Worry about the fact, the clarity of the truth of what's actually being discussed.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think. I think Socrates talked about this. What did he call the people that basically were really good at arguments but didn't?
Sophists.
Sophist, yes, but it didn't really matter. I mean, they were. It wasn't about the substance, right? I think what Rufus is pointing out is it's a debate should be about getting to the truth. So it's not about just repeating your own preconceived notions or winning an argument, right? So it's like the concept would be we both go into it trying to reason through the facts we know to get to a conclusion, but not going in as adversaries necessarily. I mean, we could disagree. I'm not saying that everybody has to agree, but the point is to get to the truth. And if you're already decided the truth before the discussion, then you're not going to come off it. You're going to be like an attorney arguing for his client, right or wrong. That doesn't lead to good in the advancement of knowledge, I guess, you know, the whole wisdom component. It would be, and that's why I
Yeah.
think, what I was always taught is wisdom isn't just about knowing a lot of facts. Wisdom is about the ability to change your mind, right? So that if you go, oh, I never thought about it that way. Like if you never do that, then you really need to up your game on the wisdom side. Because there's no way that every preconceived notion you've ever had is correct. There's a 0% chance that's true. So, and you can't be an expert at everything, even if you read it on Facebook. So you should be able to go, oh, I didn't think that. I did not know that. You're right. I come to a different conclusion now. And you should be able to talk with people, including your spouse, and actually go into it with like, I don't know where this is going to lead, but whether it's a big decision, buy a house, whatever. Where you don't go in there with like, this is where I want to get to, and by God, I'm just going to cherry pick the facts to get there. A smart person would be like, I don't know where this is going to end up, so let's look at all the facts and it gets to where it gets to. I think that's part of what Rufus is trying to say, and it's really not done in modern society. At least in my view of it, people tend to go into any discussions with an agenda on where the conclusion is, right? The old adage by one of the senators from Monahan, I think it was here. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think he's getting at.
Yeah, and I think that last part is a really key point here, right? Which is that the clarity of the data is really important, right? To use more of an engineering style way of saying it. So much in the world today, you're limited to 140 characters or a 30-second sound bite or a quick clip on the radio. And that, I'm not saying those things are all bad. They're not bad. People are trying to distill this down to something that can be ingested quickly, right? But the challenge is that when you're so worried about sounding like you know the most or winning an argument as opposed to working with the correct information, I think that's where we struggle today. I honestly believe that. And this is an interesting thread from Musonius that goes all the way back to Socrates, where you're basic, like the Socratic method of like come up with a premise and find out whether it's right or not. Don't come up with a premise and say it's right and then prove it. That's very backwards, right?
Yes.
So yeah, and this is where I think what I would hope the reader would listen to as we talk about some of these is the fact that these are 2,000 years old and still poignant today, right? We get to this point where people will be like, well, what would someone in a toga know about what we need to speak about today? And I think, well, it's all the same. Some of today that's happening, some things happening today are very much echoed from 2,000 years ago, and I think that's a key point for me. Anyways, I won't get into that because that's a whole other debate.
Right.
So, but point two on the essential teaching that Chuck has here is one I think that you and I have talked about a little bit, which is that practice is at least as important as knowledge. So
Yeah.
we are wanting to be good and virtuous, but we cannot be virtuous unless we practice virtue, and it is less important to speak about them than to practice them. And it is more. I'll just sum up the last one, saying it is more influential in leading people to action, to put practice in over theory. And you and I both lead very applied lives, right? I think I would
Hmm.
say that. I know your work with Lobo is one where
Yes.
I have received text messages from you from probably the back of a C-17 or something like that, right? And I live in a world where I am working directly with a space program, and we are making decisions that are going to shape the next phase of the human exploration activity that's going on right now, right? So it is something where you have to apply it, you have to put it into practice. So when someone hears that, like what are you hoping that they take away from a point like that?
Talk is cheap, right? I mean, obviously, people talk about Stoicism. It's. I mean, we have a podcast about it. There's you need to because it's also part of community, you know. Um, but I think what and Aurelius has the famous quote: "Stop talking about what it means to be a good man and be one." I get that. I totally get it. Right. I mean, we're not going to stop talking about it because that's part of who we are. And I think Stoics in general, but it really, I think what they're saying is it really matters what you do. Right. So if you're touting virtue and then
Yeah.
you leave your Stoicon 2025 and don't practice what you preach, you're really not getting anything out of that. And I think I don't think anybody that I know that's ever been interested in Stoicism considers himself like the sage, which is the term used by Stoics to say you've kind of reached it. I don't, just like, in many religions, you never say you've reached purity, whether it's nirvana, whether it's, being, a saint, if you will. Um, the sage, at least from the way I look at it, is something you always aspire to. And if you're heading in that direction, you're heading in the right way. But to like label yourself as that is very arrogant, which is very not stoic, right? I think part of self discipline is humility, you know. But so, and humility says that you can talk about it. That's good. That's great, and you inspire other people to do the right thing. And but it really does come down to whether you actually do the right thing.
And I think that's a key thing that we have to keep coming back to here is that discussing and reading and journaling and all of those things are good, but the application of it is no matter what going to be the number one thing, right? So I have in my world, there are many times where I have been the one to, and we talked about this on the last episode we recorded, where I intentionally say I don't know something, and people afterwards they'll come up to me and say, wow, I didn't know that either, thank you for saying that. And I'm like, well, why didn't you just say that, right? Like, because you get to this point where you begin to figure out that you can't learn anymore without trying anyways, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have to do it to try it. And the imperfections that you find when you try something, that's where the wisdom comes in, because you have knowledge of wanting to journal and knowledge of trying not to lose your temper when someone cuts you off on the highway, right?
Mm-hmm.
But until that
Yep.
happens and you try it, you really don't know everything about it, right? And I always say that practice is the most important thing with people. So, and last thing I will say too is I get the sense from Musonius that he wouldn't go and say read 400 books a year. In some ways, I get the sense that he's eventually saying you have to stop reading it and start doing it, right? I get a lot of people that are like, give me a full reading list or give me a full
Mm-hmm.
whatever on how to do this. And I am appreciative of that, and I'm sure you and I at some point on our website or whatnot can have Mick and Adam's favorite books, right? Which I
Oh,
think
we
I would
should.
love
And the
to
audience.
generate one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the audience too. But at some point, I think you and I both, and but of course, tell me if you disagree. But you and I both would say stop reading and start doing a little bit more of it, and that's the key thing here, right? You get a lot of people that, especially today, it feels like they're really nice if you meet them in person, but in a chat room talking about, I don't know, climate change, they'll bite your head off and be really rude or whatever. And the internet is
Yeah.
not real life, I know that, but at
Right.
the same time, that's not really practice, right? And
You ever see
that's something.
that video of the two dogs like looking like they're going to rip each other to shreds, and then the fence in between them is like an electric fence, so
Yeah.
it moves open, so they're now looking face to face, and they completely stop barking,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they wait
Yeah.
for it to shut again before they go. They
Yeah.
go like full. Yeah, that's the internet, right? A lot of tough people when they're anonymous.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I
and
think
it's not conducive to actual real discussions.
no, and I think we have so many things that we could label for that, right? So, but I think in terms of to group, because those ones are very straightforward ones that are very separate. But then we get into from the lectures, and there's two lectures on this, but there's also like the men and women being equal is number three that Chuck has here, and I think
Yeah.
this is where you and I was you we were talking earlier in this episode. This is where the modern side of this is huge, right? We think of feminism or universal suffrage is what you might say if it was 1915 or whatever, right? We think of that as a very modern concept, and in reality, it's not. And we're in some ways, I think it's important for people to understand that we're still fighting that battle today, right?
Yes.
Especially in parts of the
All around
world
the
today.
world. All around
Yeah,
the world.
all around the world, close to home and far from home, where we're looking at the rights of women being degraded or regressed or simply not existing, depending on
Just
where
about
you're looking.
everywhere I go and where we deliver food assistance in the world, women have almost no say. All the
Yeah,
major conflicts keep going, women have no say. If you
yeah,
want the economy to develop and if you want society as a whole to be advanced, I'd argue not only do you want equality among males and females for the sake of equality, right? Fairness,
yeah,
but it's actually better for all of us if more women were in charge.
yeah,
That's my take. I come at that conclusion of fighting 20 years of conflicts, you know, and now I'm spending my remaining years trying to help out in conflicts, right? Not as a combatant, but as a, you know, assisting in the issues
yeah,
that are caused by conflict.
yeah,
Almost all of those are men driven. I'm not a man hater at all. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not at all. I mean, I grew up in the Marine Corps and elements of the agency that are predominantly by far male.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm not at all anti-male, but I'm saying that we would be better as a society, not just for equality's sake, but because I think, and this is a generalization, but I tend to be okay with saying generalizations if they're positive. Women tend to look at the whole. Women tend to look at what's good for everybody. Where again, a generality, not everybody. Men tend to say, what can I get from my tribe?
Yeah,
Right? What can I do to defend my tribe? That's a good thing. What can I do to, go get something from another tribe? It's innate. It's how we evolved.
yeah,
I'm not saying we can't break our evolution, but I think that we would all, and I like to hear, call me out on this. I've said this
yeah,
before in places, and people have, disagree with me. But I think women in general think of the whole. They think of society. They will worry about every kid, not just their kid or their kids in their tribe. And we would be better off as a society if we actively promoted not just, you know, women having, equal access to education, but actually being in position of leadership. So there,
yeah,
I threw that down. Bring it
yeah.
on,
Totally. Oh no,
Broix.
I'm with you on that one. So it's funny, right? Because you and I both work in very male
Yeah,
dominated fields, engineering and military
yeah,
operations type stuff. And what's interesting for me is that I have been very lucky to lead teams that are 50% women. And I have also been lucky enough in the current role I work with in the space program where every level of management above me was a woman from until it hit the president slash CEO. And it was a very positive experience overall because it just gives you that different opinion on stuff, right? Like the way I would put it to any tech person out there, when you're hiring somebody who knows C# really well and Java, but then you hire someone else to who knows like Ruby, for example, which is another programming language.
Mhm.
You are bringing that person in to bring in a different viewpoint. And I would say it's very much the same way for bringing in people of different genders, different ethnic backgrounds, etc. You're bringing in new viewpoints, and my world is nothing more than improved by those things being brought forward and to the front so that people we do have those differences of opinion. So I always urge that to be the case. So I'm very much with you on that one. Now it's about time for us to wrap up, but
It
I think
is.
we go covering a couple of things. These is good. There's nine more which we can certainly continue to talk about, but I think when we talk about, I hope people when we talk about it this way, I hope people can see that we have. Yes, it's 2,000 years old, but it is applicable now, and when it just causes you to think about it, so you can try and use it in your own day to day, and that's the way I
Yeah,
look at it. So, what do you
absolutely.
think for closing thoughts, Mick?
Well, I say we pick up on going down the list
Yeah.
uh, next episode, and I would ask the
Okay.
audience a couple of things. Obviously, any comments on what we're talking about, any essays that they'd like to go dive deeper on, and also the books that they found to be very helpful. Right,
Yeah.
this is supposed to be a community we're creating here, right?
Yeah.
So if they've found a book that's written by, and so we're not just plugging our friends, even though I think our friends have
Yeah.
really good books, but
Yeah.
let's throw it out there for another version of, modern version of meditations or Enchiridion or whatever it is that they found particularly helpful and particularly meaningful. So I think having that input would be great.
Absolutely. So we'll sign off there and say thank you to everybody for joining. We'll hopefully pick this up on the next episode, and then we'll see you all on the next one. So thanks, Mick. Good chat today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, buddy. Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pupandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pup and Porch out.